In this video, we will finish setting up our in-game UI, including a pause screen. The first thing we want to do is get our score and high score to actually update correctly. Fortunately, we have some scripts to do that. So let's click on the score text and hit Add Component Score Display. What the script does is it updates the score display when the game manager tells it to. But because of the way we have written the code, all we need to do to get it to work is give it a text to display to, which is just our score text. If we hit play and shoot down this enemy, you can see that the score updates now. To get the high score set up, we do something very similar where we add the high score display script and give it a text to display to. So once we've done that, if we hit the play again button and shoot down the enemy, you can see that the high score is now updated with the high score we already obtained. Now what we would like to do is add a pause screen. You might have already noticed that you can pause the game by pressing the escape key, but there isn't any UI that pops up when we pause, so we need to create that ourselves.
To do that, we need to create a new image underneath our canvas game object. So right-click on the canvas, then select UI, Image. Now we need to change the image's source image from none because this plain white is very boring. We do that by dragging in or selecting a new sprite for the source image. So we want to go to Art, UI Elements, Backdrop, and drag our UI backdrop into our source image. Now we get something that looks a little nicer, but we want this to take up more of the screen because this is the pause screen. So if we hold down the Shift and Alt keys while we drag the corners of this image, we can uniformly scale the UI so it doesn't stretch until we get it to a decent size where we can put other UI elements on it. I think that's a good size for it on our canvas, so let's go ahead and rename the image to pause screen because that's what we will be using it for. And then we can start adding the other details that make this a pause screen. So you want to add a title text to let the player know the game is paused. So if we right-click the pause screen and then select UI, Text, we can create a new text object underneath the pause screen, and it is important that it be underneath the pause screen game object because like regular game objects, the parent-child relationship for UI also affects the way the UI is positioned and displayed. For example, if I take the text we just made and drag it out and above the pause screen, we can see that the pause screen overlaps it now. If you remember when we talked about sorting layers and how the higher sorting layers are rendered first, you can see that the canvas hierarchy works the same way, and that the higher stuff is rendered first, and so can be rendered on top of. So you need to be aware of that. Now I could put the text below but not underneath the pause screen like this, and we can still see it. But there's a problem with this too, because we want the text to move with the pause screen. If I drag the pause screen around, you can see that the text doesn't move with it. But if I put it underneath the pause screen again and move the pause screen, you can see that it also moves now. Another nice thing about having this relationship is that the anchors are also relative to what is above the current UI object. So like before where the score text is anchored in relation to the entire canvas, this new text we created is anchored in relation to the pause screen. So if we want to consistently have this text along the top of the pause screen, which we do, we can use the anchors to do that by clicking the icon, holding Shift and Alt, and clicking the top. So that looks a little better, but let's drag it down a little bit. If you hold down Shift while you drag the UI, it will drag in a horizontal or vertical line. I think that's a pretty good spot for our title text. Let's go and set up the actual text component now. Let's change the text to be paused, the font to Mana SPC. Let's change the alignment to be centered and centered. And that's looking a little small, so let's up the font size to 36. And now you'll notice that the text is gone. What's happened is the text has become larger than the box that contains it, so some or all of it has been cut off. To remedy this, we could just make the box bigger, but we also have these overflow settings over on the text component. The horizontal overflow has either wrap or overflow, where wrap will put any overflowing text on a new line beneath the previous, and overflow will just let the text go beyond the box. Similarly, vertical overflow has truncate and overflow, where truncate simply cuts off any overflowing text, and overflow just lets the text keep going. In our case, we are going to set both to overflow. And now we can see our text again. Let's stay organized and rename the text to title text because it's the title of the screen. Next, we need a few buttons on the pause screen, but for now, we are just going to add one, which is the unpause button. You add a button the same way we added the text. Right-click the pause screen, select UI, then button. So now we have a button which comes with a nice little text object as well. Like the default text, the default button is very plain and boring, so let's change it. First, let's change the text to use Mana SPC and the text to unpause. Then let's go back to our button and observe that it has both an image and a button component. We need to make changes to both. Let's change the source image to our nicer looking UI button 0 under our Art, UI Elements, Buttons, UI Button Sprite Sheet. And that's a much nicer looking button. If we hit play, you can try clicking the button. And you can see that when it is clicked, the color changes slightly, and that's the Unity default behavior for showing that a button has been interacted with. We are going to change that to make it a little bit nicer. So let's go back to our button, and the setting we want to change is transition. We want to go from color tint to sprite swap, and now you can see that the settings change, and now we are prompted for a variety of sprites that represent when the button is highlighted, pressed, selected, or disabled. And what we are going to do is change all of these except for the disabled sprite to the UI button 1, which is a slightly depressed version of UI button 0. Now if you hit play, you will see a much nicer, more fun to click button. But since there's only one button, and we are using the same sprite for the highlighted, pressed, and selected cases, we don't see much change after we highlight it the first time. One last thing we need to add to the button is the highlight fix script. Basically, Unity has some weird selection issues with its UI when you use a mouse and another device to navigate UI, and this script fixes that. But our button doesn't actually do anything yet, and we want it to. After all, that is kind of the whole point of a button. Before we fix that, let's rename our button to unpause button. Then, if we look at the button again, it has this onClick field, which lets us basically call all the functions we put in that list when the button is clicked. So if we hit this plus, we get this list item where the first important thing is this object selection. Basically, we put an object in here and we can call a function from one of that object's components, including any scripts attached to it. Since we want to unpause, our UI manager has a toggle pause option that we want to use. So let's drag our UI manager into this field. And then we'll change from no function to UI manager toggle pause. Now when we click the button, the UI manager's toggle pause function will be called, and the UI manager will try to pause the game. And you can try it and see that the game gets paused and unpaused by the toggle, but we still have this pause screen. What we want to do now is, we want to set up the pause screen with our UI manager. If we take a look at our UI manager, we can see it uses UI pages, and we haven't set any of those up yet. The one we are going to set up is our pause screen, which will be very easy. All we need to do is select our pause screen, then add component, and search for UI page, and then drag the unpause button into the default selected field. Then we can go back to our UI manager and drag the pause screen in as the first page. And then make sure the pause page index matches the element number of the pause screen in the pages list, because that is the page we want to show when we pause. Now if we hit play, we can see that if we hit the escape key and the unpause button, we can go back and forth between being paused and unpaused, although we don't want to start with the pause screen up. So we can toggle that off by selecting it and clicking the enabled checkbox. Now we can pause and unpause in our game. One last thing to point out though is that this entire time we've been working with a canvas that has its UI scale mode set to constant pixel size. If we turn on our pause screen again, you can see that it doesn't uniformly adjust when we change between aspect ratios. And this can be problematic for certain screens. The easiest way for us to get around this is to change the canvas from constant pixel size to scale with screen size, and then change the match to be at 0.5. Now when we go in between aspect ratios, we are less likely to get UI elements overlapping or stretching off the screen. And let's turn off the pause screen again.